me to start?
Yeah, just a minute. Yeah, dear learners, today we have with us Dr. Shaini Dhyani. She has done PhD in forest ecology and has specialization in ecology, biodiversity restoration and biomonitoring. She is presently senior scientist in water technology and management division at NIRI, Nagpur. So we welcome you, ma'am. And today we are going to have session on block 3, environmental issues in India. We welcome you, ma'am. You can start the session, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rita, for this nice introduction. I thank once again Dr. Sharath for his invitation to be part of this sustainability science course. And I hope this will be a good learning experience for all the participants here. And I'm sure this lecture is going to be a good place to interact with students as well. So please make sure that if you have any queries, you can interrupt me in between also. And if you want that flow is maintained, you can keep your questions at the very end and we can have a discussion and I'll try to answer your question as per my experience on the subject. So today I'm going to start with the unit that is from block 3, environmental issues in India. But first of all, this is unit 1 where I'll be talking about fragile ecosystems, livelihood and poverty. We all know that ecosystems are local people and their livelihood, it's very much interdependent. So healthy ecosystems also facilitate some good livelihood and also reduce chances of poverty and marginalization. So let's see in my forthcoming slides what all I have to share with you. But before I start, I this is one of my very favorite slides that I would like to share with all the students and participants here. There's a huge global concern, and I'm sure you all are convinced that there is a lot of consensus, both international as well as national level, on conservation of ecosystems and biodiversity. You talk about sustainable development goals, you talk about HE targets that are now going to be renewed by the post 2020 global biodiversity framework that will be finalized sometime in April and May 2022 in Kunming, China. Then we also have Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction that talks about ecosystem based approaches. The Paris COP promises and the recent Glasgow COP meeting also stressed that there is a lot of opportunities for ecosystem based approaches to reduce uh, climate vulnerabilities. Then we also have forest landscape restoration, Ramsar Convention. They all are actually talking and stressing on good ecosystems, healthy ecosystems, and how they can enhance well-being for everyone. Uh, so the last UN decade was on biodiversity from 2011 to 2022, 2020. And the recent decade on United Nations that was declared this year on 5th of June is on restoration. So from 2021 to 2030, all the national and the countries are going to have this target and enhance participation in restoration of ecosystems, both on land and marine and water scapes. And as I mentioned, the post 2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the first virtual meeting just concluded in September, and this was on deciding on how we can promote ecological civilization, especially living in harmony with nature. So, with this agenda, there is a huge concern that we not only talk about promises, we talk about legal actions to reverse biodiversity loss and promote positive gains by 2030. So this is the overall ongoing important aspects of this very important topic on biodiversity and ecosystem services. And I'm sure you all understand biodiversity and ecosystems are one of the cross-cutting themes. You talk about disasters, land degradation, climate change, and so on and so forth. Now it's very important for all of us, and I'm sure many of you who have backgrounds in biology and biology related subjects, you understand that healthy ecosystems secure human well-being. And these two pictures are from Northeast, from Meghalaya, and you can see one of the biodiversity hotspots are also getting degraded very fast because of mining or maybe because of other developmental projects. So that leads to loss of ecosystem benefits, loss of ecosystem services, loss of nature's contribution to people for human well-being. At the same time, there is these another ecosystems, the riverscapes, the wetlands, the healthy wetlands in urban areas or natural ecosystems, and they are a good source of water security for all. We know that Himalayas are a water tower of the country and also for many other South Asian countries. So this requires a lot of issues and concerns to conserve these ecosystems, and also the buffer zones, the riparian zones, the catchment areas, so that the properties, the characters of these ecosystems are intact and well conserved. Now, when I talk about mountain ecosystems in India, be it Eastern Himalayas or Western Himalayas or Western Ghats, we know that they have a very important role to play. At the same time, they are very sensitive ecosystem. So while being sensitive, they have a huge role to play for climate regulation. They regulate the climate, they attract monsoon, so they bring rains to the country and to the subcontinent, and they also ensure disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction from flash floods, from cloudbursts, from landslides, and so many other calamities that climate change can bring. Now, it's important to understand that if these ecosystems are not healthy, they are getting degraded, there are also chances that there will be more extreme climate events, there will be more uh, these disasters and vulnerability that will reduce the resilience of these ecosystems, and in turn will also reduce resilience of these communities and societies that are living in close in nearby areas. Now, coming back to the topic on fragile ecosystems, fragile ecosystems are very important, and most of the ecosystems, if we talk, are actually fragile in nature because being fragile is one of the inherent property of these ecosystems. These are the unique features and resources. And if you see India, different biogeographic zones of the country, you find that mountains are sensitive and fragile ecosystems right from eastern Himalayas to western Himalayas to central Himalayas. So there's a this long geographical area that is fragile. Then if you visit the arid and semi-arid zones of the country, the deserts, they are all, again, fragile ecosystems. You visit Western Ghats, Deccan Plateau, islands, Andaman and Nicobars, they are again fragile in nature because they are very sensitive to the changes from human-induced pressure, the changes because of climate-related impacts. So these are all fragile ecosystems. Uh, to the identification of species, communities, or ecosystem, uh, it, that might be affected because of human-induced pressures makes it fragile in nature, and that's why there is a huge concern that species, communities, and ecosystems should be conserved. Hence, identification of fragility of any ecosystem is one of the very important parts of nature conservation or nature protection management approaches by government and conservation organization. So as I mentioned, fragile ecosystems are diverse ecosystem, be it mountains or deserts or wetlands, coral reefs, even the 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 Park Bay, that is one of the marine grass ecosystems. So these are all sensitive ecosystems. So what makes them sensitive is sudden change in the character of these ecosystems. For example, if we have more developmental projects, if we have more climate change impacts close to enhanced emission or the temperature rise happen, this might affect both the mountains as well as coastal areas. So a sudden shift in environmental characters or human-induced characters will affect these ecosystems, and that's why they are considered as fragile ecosystems. So, and the reason of showing this map to you is that these ecosystems that are fragile in nature are not under any specific national boundaries. So if you talk about Himalayas or Hindu Kush Himalayas, they are far stretched in a very trans-boundary landscape. So these ecosystems are regional in scope, and they are having trans-boundary spread, and that's why there is a huge concern on trans-boundary collaboration for conservation of these fragile ecosystems. Now, what makes this ecosystem fragile? Now, this is a very important question that anyone can ask. So as I mentioned, these are sensitive to environmental changes. So huge emissions or glacier retreat or the sea level rise, they all can affect these ecosystems, be it coastal mangrove ecosystem or marine grass ecosystems or coral ecosystems. So all these ecosystems are very sensitive to environmental changes. Now, because of these climatic changes or anthropogenic pressure, what happens? There is loss of biological diversity. There are a lot of keystone species. So I'm sure many of you understand what keystone species is. So if there is impact on keystone species or some other important parameters, the biotic and abiotic factors, this will lead to loss of biological diversity, loss of original character of these ecosystems, and this will lead to a lot of marginalization of local communities that will affect their socioeconomics. So this is how ecosystem, the fragility that they have affects the larger communities living close to them. Now, when there is talk about fragile ecosystem, in Gujarat, there is extension of desertification because of climate change, regular droughts. So these are also going to affect these ecosystems. But at the same time, what climate change is bringing a lot of wet conditions in desert areas. So people from millennia who are only knowing how to live with dry conditions are finding it really tough how to live with wet conditions. So these are in certain way, there are changes that are happening in enhancing the ecosystem fragility. If you talk about coastal areas, there is a lot of salinity ingress in these areas. So that affects crop production, that affects productivity of this land. This also affects communities living close to these areas. Now, when I talk about fragile ecosystem, it's also important to understand what are direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity and ecosystem loss. While there are a lot of direct drivers where economic changes, your land use, land cover change happens because of development. Then you have demographic changes because of population rise. Then you have socio-political reasons, you have cultural and religious reasons, and of course, new technologies and scientific inputs also lead to a lot of changes in these ecosystems. So these are the direct drivers. And because of these direct drivers, there are a lot of indirect drivers that also get accelerated. For example, habitat degradation. So economic changes also brings habitat degradation. Then there is climate change. And because of climate change and human-induced pressure, there are a lot of invasive plants, your lantana, your parthenium, eupatorium, and so many other species that invade these natural sites. Then over harvesting of resources, non-sustainable consumption patterns, increasing pollution load, they all affect these ecosystems and result in degradation of ecosystem. Right now, India is one of the most having a larger land degradation area in the country, in the entire South Asia. So this is one of the ideas to give you how there are diverse drivers of biodiversity loss, and that can affect not only mangrove ecosystem as I have highlighted in this slide. This is how they can affect mountain ecosystem, desert ecosystem. And in the same time, it is also important to understand the marginalization of communities, the socio-economic drivers, the poverty. It also leads to enhanced pressure on nearby ecosystems. So something that was subsistence livelihood changes to more impact and have additional pressure on these ecosystems. So what affects is there is a lot of changes, land degradation, but if there are appropriate policies, there is more awareness on people to reduce habitat degradation, to reduce impact of invasive species by sustainable consumption of species. I'm sure there are chances we can increase nature's contribution for human well-being. Now, the one graphical presentation that I shared with you, this is a more realistic understanding about the same ecosystem. So this is one of the parts of Bhitarkanika. That's one of the second largest and richest biodiversity rich mangrove areas in the country, and we are working here. And if you see the smaller changes that this landscape has seen in last few decades, and this is very common, you see in mountain areas or desert areas also, you'll find a similar kind of figures and pictures. So there is increased a number of settlements because population is rising, because people are marginalized. So agriculture and livestock based economy is there. So if animals are there and people are not very rich, so they will use these natural ecosystem for grazing their animals. And then aquaculture is rising in this area because shrimp cultivation has good market, a lot of livelihood opportunities. So people are actually doing a lot of shrimp cultivation in these areas. People are abandoning agriculture because of salinity in Greece, and that's why a lot of brick kilns are coming up. A lot of local resorts are coming up. A lot of agriculture is also happening in this area because of increasing population. So this all is exerting pressure on this natural ecosystem and enhancing the vulnerability of these ecosystem. And there is a lot of land degradation, fragmentation because of these local activities. So, but these are very local activities where human induced pressure is there. And being in the coastal area, climate is also affecting this area. So increase in the sea level rise is also taking place. And Kendrapada district in this area, there are clear indicators that climate change is also leading to sea level rise and increasing the vulnerability of people living in this area. The local level pressure by local community, and these are the larger impacts of the developmental projects. You see a lot of industrial complexes, the terminals, the conveyor belts, and then expansion of road that is exerting much more pressure in one go than what communities are exerting in a longer span of time. So these are just to depict you what are the reasons, what are the ways the fragility of ecosystems are increased and how they are getting increased in different parts of the country. Now, if you see, there are many definitions of fragile ecosystem, but at the same time, it's important for all of you to understand that most of these concepts are too complex to be meaningfully defined. Because if I have to define what is the fragility of this ecosystem, there are no quantitative values to it. So there are variety of terms, but this term can be very much used in nature conservation and management. So if we understand there are certain ways the fragility of this ecosystem is increasing, we may try to reduce those drivers, we may try to reduce those measures and approaches by appropriate policies, appropriate strategies, appropriate participatory actions on ground. Now, as I mentioned, fragility is more or less a metaphysical term and has been so far not been appropriately quantified. But at the same time, I should also mention that in India, so far, there has been no ecosystem health assessment carried out. There was a smaller study in Sundarban Delta, but unfortunately, we cannot call it a indigenous way of assessing how ecosystem health is right now. But there is something interesting that I would like to share with you that IUCN has recently, in last one decade, has come up with red list of ecosystem. Many of you might have heard about IUCN's red list of species, but now IUCN is also working on red list of ecosystem, and the reason is if we do assess the species health assessment, species by species wise, it takes a lot of time because there are hundreds and thousands of species and we don't have enough number of researchers to assess their health. But at the same time, if we can assess the ecosystem health, it can cover a larger number of species under this umbrella of ecosystem, and we can ensure conservation of so many species. Uh, so India is still lagging, but there are a lot of case studies. If few of you are interested, maybe you can have a look to Google and find what IUCN Red List of ecosystems are. In Australia, Latin America, a larger part of Europe and North America, a lot of case studies are done on understanding the fragility component of ecosystems and how it can be defined, and how nature conservation approaches can be taken to reduce these impacts and improve the status of these ecosystems. Now, environmental impact assessment can be one of the approaches, but I think it's a very old approach. And right now, IUCN's ecosystem health assessment approach can be a very nice approach to tackle this issue. Uh, Now, what happens when we consider that ecosystem is facing vulnerability and is actually one of the characters of being fragile in nature? So there are a lot of species fluctuations. For example, if there is a climate impact, or there is a lot of invasive species that are encroaching any habitat, or there is a forest fire, or there is land degradation and fragmentation, what happens? There is uh, we understand there is already a climatic climax established whenever we talk about a natural pristine forest ecosystem. But once there is a calamity, once there is a human induced pressure or climate induced pressure, what happens is suddenly the first indicator is change in the structure of these plant communities. So from climatic climates, there is a sudden shift to pioneer species, species that can grow very fast, and so these are the first colonizers of these areas. And at the same time, the soil condition is also deteriorated. So soil gets degraded, and once the soil gets degraded, it doesn't have this capability to support the terrestrial ecosystem. So there is a need to actually identify criteria and indicators to evaluate conservation approaches to understand the fragility of these ecosystems. But it's very important that we understand the concept of ecosystem fragility, because if we want to go for nature conservation, we need to understand how ecosystem gets degraded, what are the mega drivers, what are the local drivers of habitat degradation. And this can have a systems approach to systematize the assessment and identify and locate areas that are especially fragile in nature. So, for example, if there is a urban area, you can identify how fragile it is and what are the mega drivers of increasing its fragility. And this can be an important approach to address those drivers and ensure conservation in these areas. Now, if I talk globally, there are about 1.5 billion people across the world who are living in fragile areas. So there are many parts in Middle East, then in Africa, then even in South Asia, Bangladesh, then Myanmar, and then in Africa, your Ethiopia, then in Middle East, Palestine, Afghanistan. These all are the countries that are vulnerable and have undergone a lot of issues because of human-induced pressure, because of insurgency and other kind of issues. So these people living in these areas are marginalized because the resources they can get subsistence requirement fulfilled are also in degraded state. If we see this land cover distribution across the world, the global distribution of land cover, it shows that there are about 21% of geographical area is under forest. Then there is another larger part under savannas and croplands and grasslands. And about 14% of this land is barren. So when I say the land is barren, that means this land has the potential to be restored. So that is where nature conservation efforts should be taken care of, because over the time period, there are chances that ecosystems may turn barren because of extensive use, or maybe exploitation, or maybe improper consumption patterns of people living in these areas. And if I take this global database of degraded lands, you can see a larger part of this degraded land lies in South Asia, then Northeast Asia, especially China and India. So India and China in Asia are one of the hotspots of degraded lands, and it is already reported that China and India has the larger part of land under degradation with about 490 million hectares. Now that's a huge area. So even if somebody has to plan restoration efforts, there has to be prioritization using multi-criteria assessment of which landscapes, which fragile ecosystems will be considered, how much of financing should go for restoration of these ecosystems. Now, one thing is also to be understood by all of you that when we say fragile ecosystems, it also means for India that a lot of ecosystems are mega diverse areas, for example, Eastern Himalayas, Western Ghats, and islands. And these high value ecosystems are also very fragile in nature. So there has to be enough consideration, enough efforts first going in conservation and restoration of these areas because these are the priority landscapes for the country. So if I talk about South Asia, almost 43% of the agriculture land, and if you see, almost 66% of geographical area of the country is under one type of agriculture or any other agriculture activity. And about 63 million hectare in South Asia is moderately degraded, while 31 million hectare is strongly degraded. Now, this is a huge, huge number if you see of degradation. So, degradation means these are again fragile landscapes and over the time period have gone degraded. So, if I talk about the worst affected ones, the most affected landscapes in the country, Bangladesh stands first with 75% of degradation. Pakistan is in the second with 61% of degradation. Sri Lanka with 44% of degradation. Afghanistan has 33% degradation. Nepal 26% of degradation. India has around 25% of degradation. So even one of the richest forest countries of this South Asia, Bhutan is also having a lot of degradation over the time period because of a lot of geogenic factors, because of a lot of natural factors, climate change, and also because of increasing developmental crisis, increasing human-induced pressure for variety of reasons, and to fulfill the demand of growing national population of these countries. Now, there has been a tremendous interest and emphasis and discussion internationally going on in last one decade and more on land degradation, about fragility of these ecosystems. So the first report that came recently was the IPBES Global Assessment, Thematic Assessment on Land Degradation and Restoration. Then 2019 report on global assessment of biodiversity and ecosystem services also stressed on these findings. And again, the special report by IPCC on climate change and land degradation also stressed that increasing agriculture activities, desertification, increasing greenhouse gases, and for all of you, India is one of the nitrogen hotspots of the world also. So these all land degradation activities, the fragility of ecosystems is going to enhance the climate impacts also. So the only way we can achieve sustainable development goals by 2030 is initiating land restoration at all levels. Forest landscape restoration under Bonn Challenge was signed by India in 2015. Later on, in 2019, the UNCCD, United Nations Convention on Reducing Degradation, Desertification in New Delhi also came up with Delhi Declaration that stressed on increasing the targets for restoration. And then recently, India's IPCC promises for climate adaptation and mitigation are also talking about land degradation restoration under its nationally determined targets that are promised. Now, it's not only land degradation issues, it's also important to understand that recent pandemic that we all have been facing since last almost 2 years now has been one of the reasons because of land degradation, the enhanced human ecological disruption, non-sustainable consumption patterns, land use changes, expansion of agriculture, agriculture intensification, urbanization. These all are one of the reasons why zoonotic spread has been more frequent than ever before. Wildlife trafficking, both illegal and legal. When humans made these uh, trade so frequent that these animals are now in very close contact with humans. So that makes all reasons of spreading human animal viruses to humans, and at the same time also animal viruses to human viruses to these animals, that they are not ready and adapted to withstand. So these are some of the reasons where ecosystem fragility has a longer dimension, a longer impact on communities and human populations. Now, as I mentioned earlier, also, South Asia is in the center of land degradation in Asia, and annually we lose almost 10 billion US dollars, and these US 10 billion dollars is a result of basically land degradation in some of the countries that include India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, and so on. So this is about 2% of region's GDP and almost 7% of value of the agriculture output of this uh, South Asia subcontinent. Now this becomes a very important concern, that we only talk about land degradation, but maybe we are not very much aware about it far-reaching consequences. So 2% of GDP is a huge number for the region, and 7% of agriculture output. So something that has to actually contribute is to better restoration and better agriculture output is actually getting lost, and it's annual loss. So that means if I talk about a decadal loss, the numbers will be increasing. So the numbers will be increasing for 10 years, 20 years, and that will make a huge impact on the overall GDP and output of this region. Now, as I mentioned, there are land degradation issues. So, if I talk about climate related issues, 83% of droughts are absorbed by agriculture. So if droughts are there, climate impacts are there, these are going to affect agriculture, these are going to affect nutritional demand, these are going to affect food security issues and also affect livelihood and poverty in this particular context. And this is becoming the new normal. The impact of climate change is further accelerating and enhancing other kind of threats. So this was recently discussed in one of the FAO report on disaster and its impact on agriculture and food security. Now, our agriculture is very much dependent on monsoon, and this monsoon, if this disrupts, it affects the larger country, it affects the overall productivity, then climate, the land and water, the groundwater dependent agriculture that we practice in the country largely, the good fertile Indo-Gangetic belt that has fertility properties. So this all gets affected if we don't have enough of good monsoon rain. We have less rain days or less sunny days. So this all goes and affects the food productivity in the region, and also enhances vulnerability to natural disasters. So drought becomes one, flood is another one, and this also affects the larger ecosystem. Earthquakes, landslides, and mass movements in Himalayan zone, Western Himalayas and Eastern Himalayas, many parts are already some of the sensitive regions of Asia in terms of landslide. Then, of course, meteorological disaster, extreme temperature, heat waves, heat islands, storms, flash floods, these all affect and increase the fragility of ecosystems. And if I talk about these biogeographic zones of the country, right now we have around 10 biogeographic zones, starting from Trans Himalayas in Ladakh to Himalayas in Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, then in Eastern Himalayas and semi-arid and arid zone, the desert in Rajasthan and Gujarat, the Western Ghat, coastal areas in East Coast and West Coast, and islands. So these are all the fragile ecosystem, the rich, high-value ecosystem for the country, and at the same time, fragile ecosystems for the country. So if we actually want to harness the benefits of these ecosystems, it's very important that we consider the fragile aspects. We understand what kind of mega drivers, natural and man-made, can affect these ecosystems, and how we should manage, how we should protect these ecosystems against these mega drivers. We all know that Champion and State in 1968 gave forest types of the country. But right now, after almost 50 years, we can see the climatic climates of most of the forests types of the country is changing very fast. We have dominant plantation forests, we have more degraded formations, and we have more managed ecosystems right now in the country than natural ecosystem. So this is all because of playing with the fragility of ecosystems and having more human induced pressure that is rapidly changing the type of forest, the kind of forest that were described long back and that were earlier existing in India. It's very clear from my previous slides, and I'm sure you are also convinced and that the entire South Asia region is heavily threatened by climate change. And these changes in weather condition at local level, at regional level, are going to create hotspots of the region, having negative impacts on living standards as well as gross GDP. Uh, so if I talk about Asia as a hotspot of ecosystem vulnerability and disaster, it has been well highlighted in a Global Environment Outlook Report 6, and that says that Asia Pacific is having priority in terms of increasing vulnerability. There will be more natural disasters, and this will affect a lot of local people as well as lead to a lot of economic losses. We know that forest cover is on rapid decline, but as our state of forest report, biannual report every year says that we are having increase in forest cover. Unfortunately, this increase in forest cover is not inside forest areas but outside forest areas in mostly tree outside forest context. I talked about one of the fragile ecosystems of Hindu Kush Himalayas, and there was an assessment in 2018-19 that mentioned that there is increasing vulnerability of Hindu Kush Himalayas in terms of water security, in terms of climate change, in terms of resilience, in terms of increasing vulnerability that will lead to further losses if not appropriate measures are taken to to secure and protect the fragility of these ecosystems in mountains. Then, as I mentioned, invasive species are another threat, be it your wetland areas where you see a lot of Eichhornia getting infesting these wetlands across the country. We have pine encroachment in as a monoculture in higher Himalayan region. We have these African snails, we have lantana, we have eupatorium, and we have Parthenium and so many other such species, and hundreds of such species in our country. So good thing can be adaptation using the resources in some meaningful way, generating electricity or making furniture out of them so that they can be utilized and harvested at regular intervals. And at the same time, there should be national capacity developed in terms of policies to combat invasive species. For example, you see the example of Australia and North America, where legally policies are regulatory instruments are so strong that taking any kind of plant or biological material, even when you travel to Australia and America, is really, really tough and it's a punishable offense. So that makes these stringent policies ensure that invasive species do not encroach their landscape. So these kind of measures can actually secure, and other countries also need to take proper concern for these regulatory mechanisms. Now coming back to another important topic of livelihood and poverty, I talked about fragile ecosystems. I talked about socio-ecological connectivity, how socio-ecological connections ensure that ecosystems are healthy and in turn people are also getting their benefits. So sustainable harvesting of resources can ensure sustainable livelihood, and rural livelihoods are more or less dependent on environmental resources. So if the resource starts degrading, there are chances that marginalization and socioeconomic poverty enhances in these regions. And I'm sure many of you, if you have not read joint forest management policies, please read this. In the very starting of this preamble of joint forest management, in the heart of this entire management approach is that if people are rich, they will make the forest richer. If people are poor, they'll make these forests poorer. So there is an interdependency, human forest interdependency that decides healthy forest and at the same time better economic conditions by secure livelihood opportunities. Now, land degradation leads to uh, reduced agriculture productivity. Reduced agriculture productivity means people have to abandon, shun agriculture in their lands and work as daily wage farmers in others' land, somewhere far from where they are living. So, decline wages, it leads to environmental degradation, because if people don't have choices, it doesn't matter to them if this is a protected area or a reserve forest or any other kind of forest. They will have more subsistence requirements from these forest areas, and enhancing population increases that pressure and leads to environmental degradation. So rich and fragile ecosystem and livelihood, it all are dependent to each other. Geographical fragility, rising sea level, poverty. So this example is from Bangladesh, how the ecological fragility of these ecosystems in Bangladesh have led to more habitat degradation, ecosystem degradation, and reduced opportunities for livelihood benefits, and leading to more poverty in the region. Now, this is one of the important depictions that I am taking from IBBE's assessment on land degradation and resources. So, the moment we start exploiting the land for one specific purpose, for example, if I am exploiting this land for agriculture, so I am basically taking of benefit of provisioning ecosystem more than any other ecosystem service, be it regulating or supporting or cultural benefit. And this extensive land use intensification, it leads to a state when we are actually taking one kind of benefit of provisioning benefit, and here food, and there is a stage when finally the land is not even capable of giving me the benefit of provisioning services, a food if we talk about agriculture. So this is the stage where the ecosystem is basically collapsed. And that is also the stage when we talk about fragile landscape or degraded landscape. And it's very, very tough to actually restore these landscapes back to undegraded state. So the trade-off among ecosystem and biodiversity from smaller to the greater level leads to ecosystem collapse. And this change in land use intensity, be it urbanization, agriculture, mining, needs to be considered at a very serious way. How much and at what level this intensification should take place so that we can avoid chances of ecosystem collapse, because ecosystem fragility is very much the inherent character of any ecosystem, any landscape. Now, vulnerability has its own socio-ecological linkages. So, if we are having deforestation, it is going to increase the risk. For example, if I talk about landslide deforestation, so in mountain areas, landslide happens, slope destabilization happens. There are less provisioning benefit for people. People don't get enough of direct use benefits, be it food or fodder or fuel wood or any other benefit. This leads to more pressure on women. Women have to travel long distances, as you see in a lot of pictures, and when women have to put a long hours in collecting resources, this affects their education, this affects their health, and also social environment. So while vulnerability can be seen in one angle, the major angle is the social ecological angle, where one kind of deforestation and degradation can lead to larger social issues. As I mentioned, there are dependencies, social ecological functions, ecosystem supports social system, and social governance. It supports how ecosystem can be conserved and protected. So human actions can degrade ecosystem. At the same time, human actions can also manage and protect ecosystems. Now, this is example from Uttarakhand mountain area, Western Himalaya, in Western Himalayas, and you can see these forests can actually provide a lot of benefits to communities without paying a single penny from their pocket. So they get a lot of good farmyard manure from forest, from dry leaves to run their agriculture, to get good organic productivity. They get fuel wood as an energy demand. They also get a lot of fodder. They also get a lot of wild edibles and NTFPs for livelihood benefits. But and this is another example of one of the resource called dwarf bamboo. So this is a very small NTFP, but you can see how people are getting diverse benefits out of it. They're using it for fodder, they're using it for fuel wood, they're using it for storage baskets. They're also using it to increase the productivity of their legume crops and so many other ways. These one resource can provide them subsistence benefits. But what has happened over the time period, because people are poor, as I mentioned, socioeconomic vulnerability has enhanced poverty in this region. So that has led to massive pressure on these ecosystems. So one of the examples can be Cordyceps sinensis, a fungus that has huge demand, a caterpillar fungus that has huge demand for uh, athletic and sports medicine in Chinese market, that gets extracted from some of the very sensitive alpine ecosystems from 3,500 to 4,000 meter above mean sea level. And while this extraction happens, this entire ecosystem gets degraded every year. And not only this ecosystem, the timberline vegetation also gets degraded. Then lichen harvesting, again a shadowy trade. If you want to follow up, you will know that this one resource is so heavily harvested unsustainably, that has actually exerting a lot of pressure even on oak forest in mountain areas. Then, of course, a lot of other NTFPs, medicinal and aromatic plants, even during COVID period, have a huge impact on these fragile ecosystem. So these socio-economic dynamics will also shape up forest ecosystems in some of our fragile areas, biogeographic zones of the country. Now, the inaccessibility of these ecosystems, you talk about mountains and deserts and coastal areas and islands. These are one of the most sensitive and fragile ecosystems and very inaccessible at many times. Forests are already getting degraded in a very rapid rate, and any further exploitation that's already happening is going to erode not only these ecosystem stability, will also erode living standards of people living in these areas, because they are now walking longer distance because they don't get resources on their uh, near vicinity. So this is where there is a need of ecosystem health assessment using IUCN approach of red list of ecosystem to understand at what level of degradation our ecosystems are. Are they actually facing collapse? And if it is the situation of collapse, where are the opportunities? Where are the indicators we can work to restore them in a more appropriate manner? Now, very quickly, I don't have enough time. Dr. Sharath, can I take another 10 minutes?
Sure, madam. It is up to you.
Yeah,
We
sure.
don't have any foundation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I thought it's just for an hour. But, anyways, so now I'm taking another unit in environmental pollution problems of India, that's under the same block 3. And I'll quickly like to elaborate on, there might be a lot of understanding of students and participants already on environmental issues in the country. There are a lot of them, and this was a recent survey, a participatory survey carried out in Delhi to understand what, according to people uh, across India, actually, to understand what, according to local people, local citizens, are the important environmental issues for the country. And as highlighted, air pollution was considered by almost 50% of respondents. Then climate change, overpopulation, water and deforestation, poor quality potable water, waste issues, natural resource depletion. So these are all different highlighted issues by citizens themselves to understand what kind of pollution, what kind of environmental issues the country is facing. Now, if I come back to what are the important issues, uh, we know that climate change cannot be ignored right now. There is already visibility of these impacts, be it shifting in rain days or increasing flood risk in urban and rural areas. Uh, India and South Asia is one of the hotspots of climate change. And if we see this important report that was released by Global Climate Risk Index by German Watch in 2019, and it showed that India is one of the most vulnerable countries, and it stands at 14th position in the world. That shows the vulnerability of the country. But this is an improvement because in 2017 report, India was placed as number 2 in terms of most affected by casualties related to extreme weather. And there are already a lot of people in the country who die because of increasing pollution load. There are many premature deaths because of pollution that take place every year. So this may be because of exposure to toxic air, water, soil, chemical pollution. We have a lot of persistent organic pollutants going in our land. We have a lot of microplastic entering our land, our freshwater ecosystem, and also in our marine ecosystems. Now, air quality is right now a very important uh, pollution area that needs good discussion. And those sitting in Delhi and many other tier one cities of the country, they know that how important air quality issues are right now. Breathing in a lot of particulate matter, living in atmosphere with a lot of air filters and air purifiers cannot be a escape, cannot be a way out. There has to be clean air as a right of environment to everybody who is living in any smaller or bigger cities. So these issues are really relevant. Air quality in Indian cities, be it tier one cities right now or tier two or even tier three cities, is deteriorating very fast, and right now is even considered worse than China. Especially Lahore in Pakistan was considered one of the most polluted in terms of air pollution, but Delhi and then Dhaka in Bangladesh, Mumbai again are some of the most polluted cities in South Asia. So the World Air Quality Report in 2018 measured PM 2.5. We have been I mean in NEERI we talk about PM 5 and PM 10 particulate matter 10 mmn 2.5. But then right now we have started talking about PM 2.5 particulate matter 2.5 dimensions also, and we have around 22 of the top 30 most polluted cities in the world that are right now in India. So we have so many smaller cities like even Dehradun is one of the most polluted cities in the world. So the situation becomes really critical right before Diwali till January and many times till February. When there is Diwali, they say there is a lot of crackers there in the environment that lead to a lot of smog in the environment, but also because of stubble burning in many northern states that leads to uh, winter inversion and post monsoon biomass that leads to a lot of air pollution in especially the northern part of the country, Delhi and Delhi NCR region. And Gurugram in Delhi NCR, close to Delhi, is a suburb of the Delhi Indian capital Delhi that is world's most polluted city. And the reasons are very obvious. We have a lot of developmental activities going on, and there are insufficient regulatory issues also that are one of the reasons for increasing air pollution in the country. Now, air quality index, air quality life index that was studied by University of Chicago in 2016 has also already mentioned that pollution concentration in Delhi, the capital of India in Delhi, leads to reduced life expectancy by almost more than 10 years. Now, this is alarming when your health gets affected, when your life gets affected because of increasing pollution load in the environment. And for somebody who is living in indoor areas, it's quite reasonable that one can use air purifiers and other measures to have fresh air and clean air. But for somebody who is bound to live in slum areas and close to traffic signals, there seems no way out and no way to actually get escape this situation. And as I mentioned in my previous, discussion on ecosystem fragility, livelihood, and poverty, there is a clear linkage that was established by this report on air pollution and poverty. Uh, uh, because if there is a lot of poverty, that means that people don't have access to clean energy, LPG or electricity, and they are have no other option but to rely on biomass-based energy consumption for cooking. For example, wood, charcoal, or animal dung are the only options. And this also leads to indoor air pollution. And indoor air pollution is one of the in, significant reasons of increasing lung cancer in the country. The third important area is India's increasing dependence of coal. And I think if some of you have been watching the Glasgow discussions where India has been termed one of the culprit of climate change among top 10, I think that's a separate discussion. We'll talk sometime on climate justice. But this is very clear that India has a huge dependence on coal, and this is to fulfill the energy demands of the country and increasing population. So we all know that coal is one of the dirty fuels that we have right now, and especially the indigenous coal that has high sulfur and not only release but also a lot of heavy metal loaded coal is what we have in our indigenous coal. So increasing coal consumption through thermal power plants and other agencies is actually leading to a lot of pressure on increasing air pollution load in the environment. So this is also an area where you will observe that National Green Tribunal is trying to take a serious, strict action on all those polluters who keep on polluting by having a huge dependence on coal. Now, deforestation, as I mentioned, is massive over the time period. If you see, India is showing that India has an increasing forest cover. Unfortunately, out of the uh, forest areas, mostly tree outside forest areas, uh, even in some of the richest forest areas of Arunachal and northeast India, there is a significant decline in forest cover. So these are some of the alarming conditions, and deforestation leads to a lot of land degradation. Land degradation leads to a lot of poverty issues, livelihood issues, and also leads to a lot of, uh, I mean, dissatisfaction among communities and people who are living close to these areas. It was also remarked by Standing Committee in 2019 that no significant plan has been adopted by MOEF and CC to counter illegal cutting of trees in forests. So illegal cutting is quite frequent in many parts of the country, and there is a significant decline. There is also significant increase in forest fires in the country. Every year since in the last 4 or 5 years, there has been continuous monitoring in the country where through NASA satellites, it's also clear there is a huge fire zone across many states of the country, especially central India, mountains, and also in south in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, and Kerala. Now, water rows are important to be discussed here because over the time period, it's not only wastewater coming from industries that is polluting our rivers, it's also a lot of untreated sewage. Our STPs are mostly non-functional, and these untreated sewage that finds its way to ponds and lakes and river is leading to increased pollution load in our wetlands, rivers, and ponds, and resulting in a lot of waterborne diseases. So this makes the water unfit for consumption. And those who have been reading a lot about COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-19 virus, they know that this virus is able to survive for a few couple of days in the sewage water. So this also makes this situation a little more important to understand. I'm sure there is not enough research to understand how long it takes to survive, but and there is more of a respiratory transport of SARS-CoV-19. But this is important to understand the fate of SARS-CoV-19 virus in sewage. The second important issue is groundwater dependency. The food, energy, water nexus in the country, the free subsidy on electricity has resulted in a lot of pumping groundwater and using it in agriculture. And there is a lot of fertilizer and pesticide laden chemical agriculture that is practiced in the country that leads to a lot of this polluted water entering the rivers, groundwater, especially nitrate, is entering water in rivers and groundwater and leading to health risks as well as contamination of Indian food supply. So this is a second important issue, and our most of these water dependent, groundwater dependent agriculture is already in the critical state. We know we have already read a lot about rivers getting polluted, especially the river Ganges, one of the biggest river in the country. Then Brahmaputra and other smaller tributaries are also getting polluted. And there is a specific national mission on clean Ganga that's running for almost now 7 to 8 years. It's not only by people bathing in and pilgrims taking bath during Kumbh Mela or during other significant occasion on these rivers. It's also because of a lot of sewage that enters these rivers uh, from different cities, and increasing pollution load from cities is entering these rivers. And a lot of microplastic is also uh, uh, coming to these rivers, and endocrine disrupting hormones, the medicines that we are eating, having the kind of persistent organic pollutants that we are having, it all leads its way to rivers and contaminates the entire water food chain. And this was a recent decision by Honorable High Court of Uttarakhand, where they have actually given the status of living human entities to River Ganga and Yamuna to push public authorities for protecting these rivers. But I'm sure the good way can be more awareness on in people to understand what they throw in river and the kind of contaminants they are leaving behind in the river might lead to a long-term food chain contamination. Now, drought is another important area that is an environmental issue. Uh, the 2018 report of Niti Aayog on Composite Water Management Index, India was considered to be suffering from worst water crisis in the history. About 600 million Indians face high to extreme water stress, and there are about more than 2 lakh people who die because of inadequate access to safe water. Now, there are, you might have heard about zero depth, where there will be a stage when there will be no and not sufficient water to give and to supply to people. And this stage was already in South Africa, where people got only 25 liters of water every day. Now, if we talk about the country in 2019, there was a situation in the city of Nagpur where I sit, where water was rationed for every household. You get only 20 minutes of water every day. The reason was there was no sufficient rainfall, and the water in the reservoir was only for 20 days. So that made it the first ever case of climate related impact on water resources, and how water rationing will be important in the future. There is already reports that groundwater levels of most of the country, major cities of the country, Delhi, Mumbai, will deplete by 2025 or even early. So this makes a huge case that why we need to consider consumption, safe protection of water and also rainwater harvesting as a lifestyle and important part of our household. And also treating our wastewater, the kitchen wastewater or the water that comes out from our toilets, to be cleaned and reused. The report clearly says that about 70% of water in the country is contaminated. India is at 128th place in 122 countries in terms of water quality index, but I'm sure in coming years this will be a really challenging situation for the country to make water, clean water, accessible to everyone. So the government has planned around diversion of about 30 rivers to address the country's historic water crisis, but there are other environmental implications of water linkages in the country. Now, drought is very significant. It's not about only historical droughts that have been happening. There are now more frequent droughts because of increasing climate impacts, shift in rain months and rain days. There are most of these states, Andhra, Bihar, Gujarat, Telangana, Jharkhand, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and especially Maharashtra and Vidarbha, where there is a huge pressure and situation is almost worst because of 80% of their districts are feeling water scarcity. And one of the important reason is the shifting in cropping patterns, where indigenous cropping patterns have shifted to water intensive crops like orange, sugarcane, and cotton. It's not only livelihood loss and unemployment and forced migration. There are clear indications that a lot of farmer suicides are also because of droughts in these parts of the country. Solid and hazardous waste management. You know that every city right now has a huge mountain-like structure of landfill sites. And with rapid urbanization, these mountain structures are going to increase every passing year. 75% of garbage that is collected and segregated by municipal corporation is not even appropriately segregated and is dumped without processing. And the situation is it's different from state to state, but more or less the situation is same. Then, if you talk about hazardous waste management, you know that Alang in India is one of the important air sites where shipwrecking activity takes place, and it's one of the hotspot of hazardous waste accumulation. The Stockholm and Rotterdam Center to manage waste is in an area, so we understand that how important it is for us to understand that these persistent pollutants are going to stay in the environment for a very long time, and we don't have enough measures to actually recycle them. So solid and hazard waste management needs to be considered in a more appropriate way. And with this, I come to the end of this presentation. I thank you all, and I hope the slides have some knowledge that you could have understood. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And if you have any comments and suggestions, please do let me know.
The session